Anything you want, Shea? What do you mean, Mrs. Potts? I already said you can call me Pepper, Shea. Sorry, Mrs. Potts. Shea's cheeks became flushed as she spoke to the businesswoman, to the CEO of SI, as if she was a friend who she had known all her life. I have to thank you, Shea, Pepper stated as she poured herself a glass of water. Thank me? Shea asked as the teenager furrowed her eyebrows. For saving Peter, Pepper elaborated. She moved from the kitchen to the living room area and plopped down on the couch. He's like a part of the family. I don't know what we would have done if we had lost him. I didn't do much, Shea quickly replied, her face becoming heated again. I just did what anyone would do. Not what anyone would do, Pepper waved her finger at the girl. After all, someone did put the bullet in our Spider-Man, didn't they? Shea's eyes widened a small fraction, but she nodded.
Alright, why don't you grab something to drink and sit down? I need to grab something from downstairs. I'm sure we'll be eating when the boys get back, Pepper explained. Okay, Mrs. Potts. Pepper smiled at the teenager before she set her glass down and stood up, striding towards the elevator. The doors opened as she approached, most likely Friday, the AI's doing. The elevator closed a moment later, and Shea was alone. The teenager turned around where she was in the kitchen to gaze at the cupboards when her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since lunch earlier. Having gone around to visit some people around the city, an absence of food was the result. She was already feeling weaker than usual. Alright, let's see what we can make for dinner. When Pepper got back with the paper she had been looking for, she was surprised to find a delectable smell reach her nose. Shea, what are you doing? The CEO asked as she walked into the kitchen area to find the teenager at the stove, steam blowing above her head as she cooked something. Oh! Shea jumped, nearly tipping over the pot she was stirring as she turned around to face the older woman. Mrs. Potts! I didn't hear you come in. What are you doing? Pepper asked again as she glanced at the cooking utensils with interest. I was making dinner because I know that we were going to have dinner later anyways, and you're already having me over and I didn't want you to have to make me food or order me food or anything. And since I make all my food at home, I thought I'd make dinner for you guys tonight. Her voice was unsure. She stuttered through her words, and she wrung her hands together as she spoke. That's amazing, Pepper managed out. She was struck by the fact that the girl received an invitation to someone's house and expected to have to repay them somehow. She leaned in closer, suddenly interested. What are you making? Oh, right. Shea moved out of the way to allow Pepper to look over the pot, seeing large amounts of water at a rolling boil. I was making pasta. I was making marinara sauce with it too, if that's alright. Where did you learn how to make marinara sauce? Pepper questioned, her eyes wide. The internet, Shea depended. Pepper felt a grin break out on her face as she snorted at the girl's response. Shea's eyes lit up as she laughed too. Pepper was really beginning to like this girl. Come on, Spidey, you're all good, Tony grumbled as he helped Peter out of the elevator of the medical building and off towards the front door. Sorry, Mr. Stark, Peter slurred as he tried to remain upright. Those pain meds really powerful. Tony knew that and made a mental note to tell Dr. Cho about the problem, so hopefully they could develop one that would still work for Peter, but would maybe allow him to walk afterwards as well. It's fine, Tony said, before turning to Peter, who seemed to be a bit more stable than a moment ago. Can you make it the rest of the way yourself? I think so, Peter nodded firmly, his eyes stilled as Tony released him. The teen wobbled for a moment, nearly stumbling back and falling, but he eventually managed to take a few steps with barely any mistakes. I hate getting hurt, Peter groaned as he focused on his movement, though his voice was finally getting back to normal. I hate seeing you get hurt, Tony countered. You need to be more careful, Spidey boy. I know, Peter replied, moving a bit faster as his steps became more natural again. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Tony responded, a soft smile reserved for only a few people gracing his face. Just don't do it. Roger that, Mr. Stark. A sudden flash of lightning appeared in the distance, followed by a rolling sound of thunder that reverberated from the clouds, filling the world around them with its crashing rumble. "We should get inside," Tony said. Roger that, Mr. Stark," Peter stammered as he blinked desperately to try to get his vision back to normal. The teenager shook his head and rubbed at his ears. "Sorry, it was just..." "Bright and loud?" Tony asked. "Bright and loud." "Let's go faster then. The building inside should block out most of the sound so that it's manageable for you." "Okay." Tony took wider steps as Peter ran from where he was behind the man to catch up. Just as they made it under the small overhang that sheltered the door to the living quarters, Tony felt a few drops of rain hit his exposed ankles as water poured from the dark clouds above. The droplets, more like bullets, struck the pavement and bounced off a bit, causing them to become wet around the feet, even if they were sheltered. "Friday, open the door," Tony exclaimed as he and Peter pressed themselves against the entrance to the building.
"Right away, sir."
Friday's voice was almost completely drowned out by the pounding of the downpour around them, but the door unlocked and slid open automatically nonetheless, and the two fell inside the opening in the building, closing quickly behind them. As soon as the door was closed, the sounds that were echoing throughout the room, they sat and faded, becoming more of a soft hum than a roaring torrent. Another flash of lightning appeared far out of the horizon, and a split second later, the familiar boom of the thunder followed, crashing through the world. "Seems like Thor's mad, Tony asked lightheartedly as he noticed that the kid had only winced a small bit at the light and sound, much better than usual. He stood up from his position on the floor and noticed Peter doing the same, gesturing towards the elevator so that the teenager noticed. Tony began to walk towards the lift. "Definitely. Do you think he's upset he's not invited to our sleepover?" Peter asked as he fell into a stride with Tony. "He's always been a sensitive one," Tony chuckled. "I hope you can meet him sometime." "Really? Me? Meet Thor? That would be incredible, Mr. Stark." Peter's eyes sparkled as Tony couldn't help but laugh at the childish reaction the kid gave at the idea of meeting the godly member of the Avengers. Tony shook his head to get his thoughts pushed into the back recesses of his mind before smiling at the kid. "Wanna tell Friday to send us up?" Peter crossed his arms and snorted. "It's not like that's a privilege, Mr. Stark. I do that all the time." Tony raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he shrugged. "Friday?" "Wait! I never said I wouldn't do it," Peter cried, halting Tony's words. Tony smirked. "That's more like it. Go ahead, kid." "Okay, Friday?"
"Yes, Mr. Parker?"
"Could you bring us to floor 3? Peter asked.
"Certainly."
The door slid closed and the elevator shot up. A split second later, the doors opened and a heavenly smell struck Tony's nose. "What's going on?" he asked as Peter hopped out of the elevator. "Wow, it smells great!" the enhanced teen grinned. "Pep," Tony asked, looking to where his fiancée sat on the couch. "Shea's making dinner," Pepper called from her seated position. "Awesome!" Peter exclaimed as he bounded over to the girl near the stove. "What you making, Shea?" He leaned over the pot of sauce that was bubbling before. Shea threw her arm out and, with strength that she didn't seem to possess, pushed the boy back and away from the stove. Whoa, 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 Spider Boy, Shea stared firmly. "Away from the hot stuff. I spent forever on this, and I also know that you are not impervious to burns," she added under her breath. "Even if you think you are," before raising her voice back up to her normal level and continued, "Go sit down and find something to do for 5 minutes. "Yes, ma'am," Peter complied, saluting the girl with an over-exaggerated gesture before he turned and marched over to where Pepper sat on the couch, Tony's arm wrapping around her shoulders as he joined her as well. "So," Tony began to lower his voice, "Shea's making dinner?" "Yeah," Pepper confirmed. "Pasta. She felt she owed us because we let her come here for the weekend." "Doesn't she know I'm literally a billionaire?" Tony questioned, glancing over at the teenage girl who was humming at the stove as she tossed different things into the sauce before mixing it and continuing the cycle. "Of course she did," Peter snorted as he settled on the other couch. "I think that it's the thought that counts." Alright, who wants cheese on theirs? Shea's voice called out, snapping the group out of their conversation as they turned in her direction. Oh, me, Peter exclaimed. I'll take some too, Pepper followed up. I'm good without it, Tony responded a moment later. Got it. A minute passed before Shea came strolling into the room, carrying 4 plates of food. They looked to be pretty precariously balanced in her arms, but she seemed to be holding herself solid. Mr. Stark, Shea said as she handed him the first dish, the only one without cheese. Mrs. Potts, the teenager, handed the next one to the CEO in question. And Peter, she concluded as she slid the plate down into Peter's hands. Thanks, Shea, Peter exclaimed. It looks great. The boy wasted no time in grabbing a fork that Shea had gotten from somewhere and digging into the food. So, Shea prompted, her eyebrows raised and her brown orbs hopeful. Is it okay? If you don't like it, I understand. I'd never cooked for anyone else before, so... Shea, sweetie, Pepper began, clearly ignoring the blush that appeared on the girl's cheeks at her words. This is amazing. The storm continued to get worse as the night went on, but Pepper insisted on a movie night. It's my one night off, she argued, and Shea's here. We have to have a movie night, Tony. Tony looked like he wanted to disagree. He stated while they ate that he wished to work on something in the lab. The nanotechnology needs an upgrade. The billionaire winced at his fiancée. Please, Pepper? But the businesswoman would not be swayed. And so Tony Stark relented and found himself on the love seat a moment later, a drink in his hand and his other hand around the woman he loved. Tony glanced over at the sofa where the teenagers sat sandwiched between what seemed to be every blanket on the planet. Shea and Peter had wrapped themselves into burritos in the middle of the room before hopping into the pile of blankets they had thrown onto the couch. What movie are we watching? Tony asked, turning to Pepper. She shrugged and stated, I say we let those two make the decision. Petey? Shea? Star Wars! Both said at the same time. The two turned to each other with stars in their eyes and spoke again in unison. You like Star Wars? Of course, Shea cried. It's only like the best movie saga ever, Peter exclaimed, bouncing a bit in his blanket cocoon. Alright, Star Wars it is. Friday, put on Star Wars, please, Tony commanded the AI.
Which one would you like, sir?
Friday's voice responded. The two adults turned to the kids, who both said at the same time, Empire Strikes Back! Peter and Shea turned to each other with rivaling grins on their faces. Empire Strikes Back it is, Fry.
Right away, sir.
The television turned on a moment later, and the movie was playing. Hey, Mr. Stark, do you remember when we did that to Ant-Man? Peter asked as the Battle of Hoth raged on the screen. Wait, hold up, Shea spoke, poking her head further out of the recess of her blanket wrap to turn to her new friend. You did that? She gestured to the screen. To Ant-Man? Well, he was turned giant at the time and was like kicking planes and stuff, and I thought it would be a good idea, Peter explained. Did you use your webs then? Shea asked quickly, her brown eyes sparkling. Yeah, Peter nodded rapidly. It was the best. He couldn't move, and then he fell over, all dramatic, and it was just so cool. And then he whacked you out of the sky, Tony interjected, turning away from the screen for a moment to address the boy. You got whacked out of the sky by Ant-Man? Shea asked suddenly, turning to Peter with wide eyes. Yeah, but I was fine, Peter responded. If his arm was free from the blanket, he probably would have waved her off. Okay, Shea sounded uncertain, but dropped the topic in favor of going back to looking at the television. Peter stared at her for a moment before he returned his attention back to the movie as well, the conversation moving out of focus as he became lost in the immersive world of Star Wars once again. As the four people fell asleep halfway through the movie, the storm outside continued to increase in power. The lightning seemed to get brighter, and the thunder was becoming louder and louder as the strikes of electricity moved closer to the compound. The buildings were all completely protected from the possibilities of a lightning strike. The lightning rods have been designed by Tony Stark himself. Peter Parker, who everyone knew was ever so sensitive to loud sounds and bright lights, stayed asleep as the tinted windows and the sound-dulling walls that protected them from the outside allowed him to rest peacefully, despite his powers. Shea, on the other hand, was not as lucky. She woke up when the closest lightning strike hit, only 2 miles away. The thunder cracked and the girl felt like her ears were splitting apart. Moving as quickly as possible while still remaining silent, Shea struggled but managed to escape her blanket prison, running lightly across the room to where her backpack sat. She had let out a small cry of pain before slamming her hand over her mouth to keep quiet and squeezed her eyes shut, as another bolt of electricity struck, this one even closer than the last one. The sounds rumbled outside, and she pressed her hands to her ears, biting her tongue to keep any sounds from escaping. The thunder passed, and still holding her tongue between her teeth, Shea began to rummage through her bag even faster than before. Come on, where are they? Her mumbling was cut off as she realized that her specially designed technology that she had made for this specific reason was outside in a small storage compartment that she didn't know how to open. Safe, but in the middle of a horrible storm that was way too dangerous to go out in. No, Shea whimpered. Another flash of lightning reached the corner of her vision, but she saw no more as her eyes were screwed shut once again, and her ears were covered. She clamped down on her tongue as hard as she could, tasting a metallic flavor of blood a moment later. But she couldn't let up. She couldn't start screaming at the house of the 2 most important and influential people in the world, as well as her new friend right there. The storm continued getting closer though, and the lightning bolts with the accompanying roar of thunder were just getting worse. Shea shoved her hands against her head to try to prevent any of the sound from getting in, but it was barely any use. She pushed herself back into a corner and buried her head in her knees, attempting to make herself as small as possible. But then another strike of lightning came, the worst one yet, and the poor teen couldn't take it anymore. She opened her mouth and screamed. Pepper was terrified when she woke up to screaming. She shot up out of the still asleep Tony's arms and whipped around, scanning the room for any potential threats. But all she saw was Shea. The girl was curled up into a ball in the far corner of the room, her backpack things strewn about the room a little ways away, and her eyes were squeezed shut, her ears tightly covered, and she was screaming. Pepper turned back to the man that slept near her and shook him awake. Tony, she hissed urgently. The hell, Pep? What's going on? His words were a bit slurred, but his eyes seemed to fly open as he heard the scream. Are we under attack? No, Tony. Pepper bit her lip and pointed, tears gathering in her eyes. It's Shea. What's going on with her? A moment later, a crash of thunder was heard outside as it followed a lightning strike from somewhere, and Shea's screaming increased for a moment before moving back to normal, a sad mix of shrieking and sobbing. Shea, sweetie? Pepper asked as she approached. What's going on? At first, she was afraid the girl hadn't heard her, but suddenly the teen responded. Too bright, she cried. Too loud. Okay. What do you need? Earrings, Shea gasped out. Please. Tony, Pepper turned to her fiancé. She had earrings with special leads, I guess, that she made herself. They're in the storage container outside. Can you figure out how to get them? Got it, Pep. Tony nodded, running off a second later. Mrs. Potts, what's going on? Pepper rolled around to where Peter had been sleeping a moment ago to find his wide brown eyes staring back at her intently. His gaze moved from her to Shea's small figure in the corner, and he asked meekly, What's wrong with Shea? Does anyone even listen to this half of the video? I don't know. But this fanfiction was crazy. I don't know what's gonna happen next one. If this was me, I'd be so embarrassed. I'd be like, oh my god, I am screaming and having a full-on panic attack in someone else's home. Oh my god. But yeah. I'm sorry this is late, by the way, by one day. But I had to work on my history project, and then due to the coronavirus, I'm out of school for 5 weeks, so I probably can produce a video maybe almost every day until like I have to go back to school. But I have 2 Spanish projects, so we'll see. And if my mom stays home, because I can't go to my recording room anymore, so I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to make a video in front of her because I am shy. I'm doing that finger meme thing where you put your 2 pointer fingers together and you're like, I'm shy. Yeah, I got a text from my mom. But stay tuned for chapter 10. It's gonna be awesome or really sad. Either one. Because right now, I don't know which way it's gonna go. It's kind of crazy. Sorry if I sound sick. It's probably because I may be a little sick because I'm talking and breathing like that in the middle of every sentence. Whew. So yeah, stay tuned for chapter 10. I already said that. Toby, say goodbye. Woof, that's my dog. Goodbye. And thank you to all the new subscribers. I love y'all. Please don't leave me.